Good morning, colleagues. Once again, my name is Kosie Tuntuli. I'm from the Research Capacity Development Unit. Uh, I would like to welcome each and every one of you and thanking you, colleagues, for taking your time in attending a workshop titled Ethical Research Practices Preventing Misconduct. Colleagues, before we can move forward, I would love to indicate or notify that this workshop is recorded for the purpose of those who didn't attend today to have access to the workshop recording, as well as those who attended today to have a recording at a later stage for references. So as I've mentioned earlier, I am Kosie Tuntuli. I'm from the Research Capacity Development Unit, and this workshop is organized by the Research Capacity Development. Why this workshop matters, or why are we attending this workshop for today? In an increasingly complex and competitive academic environment, ethics in research is more important than ever. Responsible conduct is at the heart of scholarly work, and maintaining high ethical standards protects not only the credibility of individual researchers, but also the integrity of our institutions and the trust of society. So that is the main reason. And our facilitator, Dr. Lorenzo David, will be taking us through in depth of this discussion for today. So before we can move forward, I would like to go through some housekeeping rules. As I've mentioned, this workshop is recorded. And if you will require a recording of this workshop, please make sure that you are enrolled in any of the model communities, which is the supervisor and the PDRF model communities. If you are not enrolled in any of the mentioned communities, kindly send us an email on RCD inquiries or on supervision course, and then we will be assisting you with the registration. Alternatively, now the RCT has moved to an RCT management system, which is integrated to ULink, so it's available under services. The last option is RCT MS. So if you are unable to register or if you encounter problems with registration, we kindly request you to send us an email as well. Alternatively, you can visit us on our libraries today. My colleague is at the DFC library at the Postgraduate Center. So you can visit if you are at the library just to get assistance with the registration to one of the platform that I've mentioned. So please note that I will enable all your mics. However, please make sure that no sound coming or no background sound coming from your mic to interrupt or disrupt the proceeding of this workshop. Alternatively, you can, if you do have a question, just type in the chat or raise a hand, and then I will notify our facilitator, Dr. Lorenzo David, that someone has raised a hand or someone wants to add an input or have a question, or just write under the chat, and then we will attend to your question. Another thing, I'll be posting a feedback evaluation under the chat. We kindly request you, colleagues, to take your 2 minutes. The feedback evaluation help us in terms of preparing and organizing workshops of this kind, and also to find areas of improvement where we can improve, and also to structure the upcoming workshops in a better manner, or trying to improve our service delivery, as well as to give feedback to our facilitators for taking their time as well. So without any further waste of time, allow me to introduce our facilitator. Today, we are honored to be joined once again by Dr. Lorenzo David, who will be facilitating today's session. Dr. Lorenzo David is currently a coordinator at the Research Capacity Development Unit at the Postgraduate School University of Johannesburg. Dr. Lorenzo David was recently awarded a PhD in biochemistry for his assessment of transferring tagged gold palladium and gold palladium bimetallic nanoparticles and their potential for anti-cancer drug delivery at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. By adopting a holistic approach to education, Dr. Lorenzo hopes to inspire students to achieve personal and academic success with a hands-on and learner-centric approach to value-based learning. So without further delay, let's warmly welcome our facilitator, Dr. Lorenzo. Dr. Lorenzo, you can proceed with the workshop. Thank you so much, colleagues, once again for attending. We hope and believe this workshop will inspire and add a valuable input to what you currently have. Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you so much, Dr. Lorenzo, for honoring our invites and taking your time to facilitate today's workshop. You can proceed with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ngosi, for the introduction, and welcome, colleagues. I hope you all are well. I'd like to thank you firstly for joining us once again for this session, which is titled Ethical Research Practices, Preventing Misconduct. And I've just adapted the title to Preventing Misconduct as a Researcher. So we're going to be looking at this from a researcher perspective. Obviously, many of us, are in this role, so I thought it'll be more adapt for us to do that. So if I can just share my screen, Mr. Nkosi, I'm just going to share. If you can remove what's being shared currently, please.
Yes, you can go ahead and share now.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So hopefully you can all see my screen. I'm just going to go into presenter mode. Mr. Nkosi, are you able to see my slides in presenter mode, and are they switching between slides?
Yes, Doc, I can clearly see your slides. If any of our participants, if you can confirm that you can see the slides. If not, please refresh your browser. You can just log off and come back again, and you will be able to see the slides that are currently displaying.
Okay, so
Okay,
in the
Doc, I
meantime,
think we are good to go. Everyone can see your slides. Sorry for that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so like we said, the topic for today's workshop is focusing around ethical research practices, preventing misconduct as a researcher. And these are just some general guidelines and some frameworks that we've identified that are obviously out there. We just thought we'll bring it to your attention and hopefully bring about a bit of a discussion around this topic. And as we go through the presentation, I really encourage the members of the audience, please feel free to jump in at any time. If you have a question or a contribution, we all can learn from one another. So I'd like this to be as engaging and interactive as possible. So please feel free once again. So on this topic here, we understand that research misconduct actually poses a significant threat to scientific advancement, as well as public trust in research institutes and with the universities, as well as to the integrity of academic institutions such as the University of Johannesburg. So as much as we understand that when we are working in our labs or our research groups, that we generally are working alone or we're working with a small group of people, we actually represent UJ as a whole. And if we take that much wider, we actually represent the academic community. So the way in which we conduct our research needs to conform to certain guidelines to make sure that we're not crossing any ethical boundaries and that our research is what we're presenting is as a true reflection of what the results actually tell us. So in this presentation, we hope to address some of the critical issues of research ethics, as well as provide some comprehensive strategies for preventing misconduct amongst researchers at all career stages. I think it's important at this stage for me just to outline that in terms of research misconduct, I don't want to use a blanket approach and say that every form of research misconduct was actually done intentionally. I think it's important for us to actually make ourselves aware of, changing guidelines and frameworks so that something which may have been acceptable a few years ago may not be acceptable today. So just keeping ourselves aware of the current changes in the guidelines, as well as some of the more core values in terms of what ethical research actually entails. So we're actually going to draw from some established ethical frameworks. We're going to focus more on the NIH, and obviously we can try and bring some, because lots of the research institutions actually adopt that, but obviously manipulate it to suit our own circumstances. And hopefully we're going to come up with some evidence-based practices in which we can ensure that we align with these frameworks and that each and every aspect of our research actually is ethical, and we prevent any form of misconduct whatsoever. So quickly, we'd like to go through some of the aims of this presentation, and I would like to start by defining what research misconduct is and also defining some of its core types. Thereafter, we're going to go into identifying some of the harmful research practices and what are the consequences in terms of us as an individual, in terms of the institution. I think if we can define these two and understand what the consequences are, it allows us to plan ourselves much more carefully moving forward. The next point will be to apply ethical principles to research design as well as publication. And in terms of publication, there's actually a lot that we can discuss. So we're going to go through some of the key points, and I hope to bring in some members of the audience on this point specifically to lean from some of their own experiences. We'll also move on there to develop some strategies to prevent misconduct at individual as well as institutional levels. We're going to focus more on the individual level in this presentation. And then we're also going to navigate some reporting procedures for suspected misconduct. In this here, I actually don't want to touch too much on it because I think this is more a policy, this relates more to policy. So, and this would obviously be specific to UJ. So we will just briefly go through that just to provide an example of what some of the procedures actually would be. So as you can see, the slides are actually quite text heavy. And the reason for that is when I upload it, or when I give it to Mr. Ntuli to upload it, I'd like anyone else who's reading to be able to follow the train of thought as well as the conversation that is going on as well. So this is going to be more of a discussion, and I hope it's actually going to be quite useful as well. So I'd like to start off by saying, let us define what research misconduct actually is. And a good definition that we found is that research misconduct is defined as any research practice that deviates seriously from the commonly accepted ethics or integrity standards or practices of the relevant research community. And basically any deviation from this or anything that's done underhanded can be considered to be research misconduct. So what are some of the core types or the fundamental types of misconduct in most of the regulatory frameworks that we find? The first one is going to be fabrication. And I think this is quite standard for every researcher. We understand that if anyone is fabricating results, this is a serious form of misconduct and can actually have some very severe consequences, not only to the individual, but also to the research project, and also to, if you're developing a product, shall we say that, let's just say if you're in a pharmaceutical industry, or maybe you're in a construction industry and you're developing a new type of material, if we are fabricating results, obviously that means that the product is not going to function as we are advertising, and that could actually cause harm to the people that are going to use this set product. So fabrication is a big issue. I did mention in a previous presentation there was regarding a clinical trial. And I think I see quite a few new people who've actually signed up to this session. So I'll just quickly go through it. Bringing in AI into this whole conversation, there was a case quite recently where generative AI was actually used to fabricate clinical data. And that clinical data was actually published, and it was actually moving through each of the stages of the clinical study. And Luckily, what we see is that this was actually identified before it could actually cause any harm. So as we can see, fabrication now, especially with the application of generative AI, is actually going to become it's more possible for people to fabricate their results and create results which align more to what their hypothesis is actually going to be. It also happens to be easier. So it's something that we actually have to be very aware of. And in this regard, we're actually going to discuss how through effective data management procedures and practices, we can actually safeguard our research. Because if we have the written proof of, I've done A, B, and C in terms of lab experiments, these are the generated outputs of the pictures of the results are taken from the actual machine. We are actually safeguarding our research and we are preventing ourselves from ever being accused of research misconduct as well. The next one is going to be falsification, where we manipulate research materials, equipment, processes, or data. In this case here, where you may have done 10 experiments and 9 of them show you a positive result, whereas the one does not. And an individual may be like, 9 out of 10 is actually quite good. Maybe I can just adapt this last protocol to actually suit my results. And this will be a form of falsification of our results and will have serious consequences as well. The last core type is actually plagiarism. And obviously this ties into lots of our research publications in where we present others' ideas as being our own without actually giving them the credit. And this is actually a type of serious misconduct once again, and something which follows due process and can lead to quite some severe consequences. So if we move beyond this and we look at some of the extended definitions, they may include conflicts of interest violations, authorship disputes, improper data management, and violation of human or animal subject protocols. And in this regard, obviously, that's why the ethics application comes in and is so important, because we are once again aligning ourselves to a framework and guidelines so that when our results is published, no one can actually come and say, you know what, even though the results show this, this was unethical in the way you conducted this particular study, and it invalidates the research that actually has been done. So as we always say, prevention is always better than cure. So in this regard, it's always better for us to be aware of what is accepted versus not accepted, and then we can align our projects according to that before we reach, obviously before it gets too late. So we're just going to, the last thing I'd like to say is that a misconduct can actually occur at any stage of a research process. And that can be your planning, in your actual conducting of the experiment, in your reporting, or even in your reviewing. So we're going to go into this in a bit more detail, and I'm going to try and keep this presentation about an hour, under an hour, because I feel that in this regard, people will be able to, pay attention for much longer. So let's just go through this and I'll try to keep within the hour as well. So when we try to understand the different types of research misconduct, we've mentioned that there's fabrication, falsification, as well as plagiarism. So we've discussed this previously, and in essence, this is actually called FFP, fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism as well. So I'm just going to go through. I think we've discussed many of this already. I think in terms of fabrication, you don't want to be inventing results, or if someone you don't want them to be inventing results, creating fictional experiments, observations, or participants. And once again, AI can actually be used unethically in this regard to actually generate responses as if they were from people. And this obviously all leads into research misconduct and unethical practices. The next time of fabrication would be reporting procedures that actually were never performed, and as well as manufacturing outcomes to support your hypothesis. Quickly, if we go through falsification, we understand that this will be manipulating your data, manipulating your results to get the desired outcome, changing or omitting data to make results look more significant. And I think it's a key point for us to actually focus on would be that omitting data. Often when we think about falsification of results, we think that, I just have to create new results or edit your results in order for it to be falsification, but this will not be true. So if we have to basically summarize what falsification of results actually would be, we can say it's changing basically your results in any way, shape, or form to actually suit your hypothesis. Because like we said, if you've got 9 positive results but 1 negative result, and you omit the 1 negative result, you are actually guilty of falsification because you are not presenting the entire picture of your research study. And I think in terms of plagiarism, many of us would have quite a bit of experience with this in terms of understanding the concept. And the one that I'd actually like to focus on here would be self-plagiarism, which would be recycling one's own work previously published without a disclosure. So we don't want to basically take the old paper that's from 2, 3 years ago and repackage it into something new and obviously present it to another journal article. This is a form of research misconduct. And the implications of this is generally in academic environment, we understand that every paper that we publish is associated with our profile. So it's also associated with giving us units, which are used for tracking our performance as well as promotion. So in this case here, we are actually creating incentives, shall we say. We're repackaging data so that it can be of benefit to us. And this is a form of research misconduct as well. So then we lead on to some questionable research practices. Now, these are less severe than misconduct, but if we look at it at a whole, it will still be harmful to the integrity of the research coming out of our group. So this, unfortunately, is often more prevalent and can be more damaging than outright misconduct. And let's look at some common examples. So these are some terms that we found online. And the first one would be hawking, which basically means hypothesizing after your results are known. So this is presenting post hoc hypotheses as if they were predicted. And this is obviously something that's frowned upon. The next one is going to be p-hacking, which is actually was very interesting when I first read about it, which means we're running multiple analysis until finding a statistically significant results. So we understand that generally I come from a science background and we would run our results in triplicates. And sometimes we'd even duplicate that just to make sure that there is alignment between the triplicates. But if you are continuously, let's just say that you are analyzing a particular sample. I remember once that we were so in my project, we had to use this particular machine to actually size the nanoparticles. And what was happening is that we had a group that actually came in that requested to use the machine. So we were sitting with them and we were running their samples through the machine. And essentially what I'm trying to say here is that their first 10 sets of results was not as what they expected. So what they did is they continued to run these until it basically the machine would give you something that closely resembled what they were looking for. They would omit the other results and they would only take the one that actually gave them what they were looking for. So in a similar light, if we think about p-hacking, it's also manipulation of your triplicate data to give you a p-value, which means that your results are statistically significant. And I think that's a key point here. So if you have in a triplicate and your p-value is, let's just say, above 0.1, if it's 0.2, 0.3, by changing each of the triplicate values, you can actually change the p-value and make it statistically significant. So that's a more concise definition of p-hacking. They also something that's quite interesting would be salami slicing. And basically this means unnecessary fragmentation of research into multiple publications. And I think many of us would have come into contact or be aware of this as happening. There's certain studies, in some of my experience that I've had at previous universities, if there is a PhD study or a master's study that's going on, a single study can be broken up into as many as 10 papers, which not to say is wrong, but I think if the paper warrants it, then it's good. So salami slicing will basically mean that you can split one paper as your literature review. That's perfectly fine. Then you can take your methods and materials and split that into 3 papers when actually can be combined into one. So that's an example of salami slicing. And this is something which is actually questionable because once again, we are if we are doing this, we need to question what is the quality of the journal that we can actually submit this paper to, because not only would it be something that is a questionable research practice, but it's actually harming it's harming our research, because if we were trying for a Q1 journal, if we fragment that paper, we may have to aim a bit lower. So that's also harming our research as well. The next one is going to be gift or ghost authorship, and this would basically be inappropriate inclusion or exclusion of authors. And in this regard, we actually had a discussion in yesterday's workshop regarding it. So we understand that if you are in a university, if you're in an academic position generally, and you publish a paper, there is a unit assigned to this. And what is generally happening, if you have a particular target to meet, what was happening previously and what had been mentioned was that friends would put each other's names on their papers. So if I have 5 papers and you have 5 papers, what we would do is that we each would put our names on the other person's paper, and essentially each of us has now 10 papers. We've doubled our output. Obviously, this is not good, because in order for you to be considered an author on a paper, you have to meet certain criteria, meaning that you have to be involved in every stage of the project. This is all the way from conceptualization to designing, to implementing, to collecting your results, to analyzing the results and writing your papers. So if you are not involved in all of those processes, and if you are not making significant contributions to it, you generally do not meet the minimum requirements of being an author. So it's just something that we have to be aware of as well. And the next one is going to be redundant publications, where we essentially publish substantially overlapping content multiple times. And I think this actually ties into the salami slicing. Other common examples of questionable research practices involve poor research documentation, as well as management of our data. I don't know if many of us can think back to, maybe a previous degree, master's or PhD, where you were getting all these fantastic results, and then, you're so tired generally at the end of the day, you just like, no, I'm saving it to this external, or you're uploading it to the cloud, whatever it is. And unfortunately, when it comes time to writing that paper, you have 100 files, and it obviously becomes a bit difficult for us to actually work through what was done when. So proper documentation in terms of for us, it would be a lab notebook where every single step that you are performing, everything that you're doing goes into that book, as well as proper data management would actually enhance your research practices. Then we've got biased peer review practices. There have been issues, these are actually common knowledge, where in terms of reviewing an article, people would submit articles to journals they know their friends are actually editors in. And this obviously caused major issues in terms of the validity of the results, as well as impacting the reputation of the journal as well. And then the last one would be inadequate mentorship and supervision. So if we think about research misconduct, I think this ties in, I believe it ties in, because at the end of the day, we are developing students. As a supervisor, you are developing students. So by you taking on the responsibility of a student, or us taking on the responsibility of a student, but thereafter not following through and giving them the time and effort that they actually require and the input that they require, this is a questionable research practice, especially if we're going to be using their results to add to group papers, shall we say. So if we go on to what are some of the consequences of research misconduct, we look at it we'll break it down into 3 groups. Let's look at it individually first. So in terms of us as individual researchers, it can cause serious career damage. So this can result in termination of your position from a university or research facility, termination of funding, funding being pulled, and your research group or yourself being ineligible to actually apply for funding moving forward. And excuse me, we all understand that not much research can actually be done without funding, as well as damage to your reputation. As with many things in life, we understand that it can take an individual a lifetime to build up their image and their reputation as being an ethical, sound researcher, and this can actually be destroyed in a very short period of time. So, to that, just a note to add as well, that there was an interesting talk that I was listening to, which was mentioning that as important as collaboration is for the advancement of science, I think we also have to be aware of the people that we are actually collaborating with, and we have to trust them because obviously, if both of our names are going onto a paper, and unfortunately, if someone is accused of research misconduct, that does not shed us up, show us in a good light as well. So here's something for us to be thinking about as well. In terms of further consequences, there will be retraction of publications. There can be retraction of publications and invalidation of research contributions. So if you have published 10 excellent papers and one paper which unfortunately, there was some gray areas that can actually have a negative impact on the rest of your papers and how they are viewed by the academic community. There can be legal consequences in severe cases, especially if you've received funding and then you've reported incorrect results just basically to continue receiving the funding, or if there's even been harm to people. In that case, there will be severe legal consequences taken to us. As well as if we look at the psychological impact, obviously no one would like to be in this position, and being in this position will put you under a lot of stress in terms of your reputation, in terms of legal, in terms of your mental well-being. So there are some serious consequences to that. In terms of science and academia, if we are basically putting out research which is fabricated, which is false, which has been plagiarized, it's basically it's shedding other literature basically or the field in a poor light. So we can also understand that this also would involve wasted research resources on building on fraudulent work. Essentially, if there was two people going for a particular funding and it was given to person A, but person A actually was involved in research misconduct, that funding would have been better if it went to person B, shall we just say, for a simple example. And the one that's actually very important would be what are the implications or the consequences for society? We understand that much of the research which is done in universities is actually taken further in research institutions and thereafter converted into products. If there is falsification, fabrication of data, to suit certain narratives, especially in organizations where they're producing, let's just say, vaccines, medication, anything in the pharmaceutical industry, in terms of engineering, whatever it may be, this can actually have cause direct harm to the individuals. Number one, by causing people to get sick, potentially even dying, putting them in dangerous situations, as well as importantly, it undermines public trust in, let's just say, universities. So in that case there, we can always go back to the example of what was happening during COVID. And in COVID, we had the vaxxers versus or the people who chose to get vaccinated and those who chose not to. And the general consensus between those who chose not to was that there was a mistrust of the industry. And I think the more that research misconduct is actually continues and the more it comes to light, it's only going to undermine that trust and going to shift society away from actually trusting what we are trying to do here. Because at the end of the day, I believe that every form of research that we are doing at a university, at a research institute, the ultimate goal is to make a positive change in the lives of society around us. That's just my personal belief. So it doesn't really make sense us actually or an individual actually falsifying results because it's not going to be of the benefit of society. It's only going to be to the benefit of us, and the consequences of that, it doesn't weigh up. So I've been
Well,
talking for
sorry, Doc,
quite a while.
for interruption. There
Mhm.
are some few questions on the chat. The first question
Okay.
is from Dr. Christina. Is
Mhm.
it an academic misconduct to submit an abstract for a conference that is yet to be conducted?
Okay, I'd need a bit more. You said Dr. Christina. Dr. Christina, would you like to unmute your mic, or maybe Nkosi, if you can just read that out to me again, please? Is it
Is it
academic
an
misconduct?
academic misconduct to submit an abstract for a conference that is yet to be conducted?
As in submit the abstract to the university? I'm just a bit unclear because I'm just a bit unclear on the question. Maybe Dr. Christina can just elaborate a bit more, because from what I'm understanding here, it's that generally how conferences work, we'll have to submit our abstract. That's the general process, right? But are you referring to, are we submitting this as a published work before the actual conference has taken place?
Yes. Dr. Christina, can you unmute your mic and elaborate more?
Hello.
Hello. Hi, Dr.
Yes,
Christina.
Doc,
Yeah,
we
can
can
you
hear
hear
you.
me? Yeah, sorry.
Yes,
Yes, I
we
just
can.
want to find out. The conference is yet to take place, and one is asked to submit an abstract for that particular conference. Though the time for the submission and the time for conference is like 5 months apart. So I want to find
Mhm.
out if it is an academic misconduct to just maybe just write an abstract of what you're thinking could be the outcome of the experiment, then quickly work on the experiment before the conference.
Okay. Okay, that's a very good question. Apologies for the noise. I think there is some work in the building. That's a very good question. So generally, sorry, it's just a bit of noise. So generally what happens is that, as far as my knowledge, because I've done this before, where I had a work in progress project, and obviously my results were not complete as yet in terms of the abstract. So what I'd actually done is I had reached out to the conference organizers and explained to them that, you know what, I am still currently working on this project. I do not have my results as yet. But what I can do is, in my abstract, you can basically state that you have a current work in progress, and that these are what the literature is saying is some of the expected results. And then generally what happens is, after you meet the submission date and you get approval, at a later stage when you have your results, generally conferences will allow you, if you make prior, say, arrangements with them, to resubmit your new abstract with the data you got from your experiment. I think that would be the safer way of doing it. So I hope that answers your question, Dr. Christina.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, welcome. Apologies for the noise, everyone. I don't know, they're drilling somewhere in the building. But yeah, Nkosi, there any other questions?
Yes, there is another question from Dr. Noel. Is it a misconduct to present a paper at a conference which has already been published?
No, as far as I'm aware, no. As long as you actually mentioned that this has been published previously. But it just goes on to say, as long as you haven't presented this same paper at a at another conference, I think that's where it becomes like, if you take in the same paper, you can't publish it in two journals. In the same regard, you can't publish the same thing you can't present the same bit of information at two conferences. So as far as I'm aware, I don't think it would be research misconduct, as long as you disclose that, you know what, this is a paper that I have recently published, because I've done this, right? I have, for my PhD works, I'm looking at it in this context here. I hope I'm understanding Dr. Noel right, in that I first published, because obviously when you are publishing results at a research conference, um, you never want to publish any results that have not, you don't want to present any results that have not been published. Why? Because it leaves it open for people to actually take your results and write their own paper. So I think the generally accepted standard would be, fine, you publish your results in a journal, especially if it's something that is very integral to your research. Say you're doing a PhD project, you want to publish that first, and thereafter you go and you present on your specific results, and you can mention the paper as well. So I hope that answers your question, Dr. Noel. But that's generally what I've done in my own experience as well. Okay, are there any other questions, Ngozi?
No other question at the moment. I think we are good to proceed.
Okay, okay. Just one thing to mention. I'm sure there'll be many other people present in this workshop today that will have, you know, much more experience at this than I do. But I have attended conferences where you'll actually see people walking around with little cameras, or they're essentially taking pictures of people's posters, and that can actually cause an issue because there are some unethical people out there. So if you are presenting your research, especially if you're a master's or PhD student, especially at a research conference, just be aware that it's generally accepted that you should publish your results first, or alternatively, if you're doing a poster, let's just say you're doing something in gene work, you don't have to mention the specific gene. Like you can put in the gene and you can let the conference organizers understand this here, but you can put gene X or gene Y as an example. You can use basically key terms for it. And this is if your results have not been published as yet and you want to protect the integrity of your study. So in terms of the two questions, I don't think that it would be research misconduct as long as we disclose to the organizers of the committee and obviously make prior arrangements in terms of submitting the abstract with the final data at a later stage, as well as acknowledging that this paper has been published in journal so and so, and obviously that can't be published in another journal as well. So I don't think it's going to be an issue. But okay, let's move on to guiding principles for ethical research. And see, this is a framework that actually was developed by the NIH, and we see many different iterations of it actually being implemented in research institutions around the world. So these are some of the core values, and then obviously in South Africa, we will adapt these to our specific situation. So I'm just going to go through them quite quickly. The first one is going to be social and clinical value. The research that we're conducting should answer important questions and contribute meaningfully to knowledge. We don't ever want to be in a situation where we're doing research just for the sake of doing it, for getting papers and for getting, any sort of financial benefit or reputational benefit for the sake of it. There should always be an aim to it. The benefits should justify asking people to accept inconvenience or risk. I think this is targeted more towards the type of research which involves human subjects, be it in clinical trials or people performing questionnaires, social experiments, that kind of thing. Your research questions should actually address improvements in health prevention or care. So once again, this all ties into each other. Your research should have a point, and the point should ultimately be to benefit society in some way, shape, or form. So the next guiding principle would be scientific validity. And in this case here, we understand that your scientific design should be sound and capable of producing reliable, valid answers. So what exactly does this mean here? I think many of us would have come across examples where we, say from a science background, right? Or even we can extrapolate this moving to other faculties. But from a science background, I find a paper. The paper looks to be absolutely fantastic. It gives me the correct protocol for me to synthesize what I'm looking for. So me excited on a Monday morning, I go into the lab and I replicate this protocol to the second. I follow every single instruction to the second. And what happens? I don't get a positive result, which basically means that the paper is not allowing you to reproduce what they have done. So you can't actually check the validity of their research process or their protocol. So in this case here, we should be able to, or when we're publishing as much as possible, include as much data as possible into the methodology, allowing another group to actually reproduce the result. And that's just a personal belief of my own, because I think all of us have been in situations where we are looking for a protocol, we finally find a paper, maybe we pay, a few $100s for it or whatever else it may be, and then you replicate it and it gives you a false result, which is never a good thing. So the whole point of science is for us to advance together. So I learned from people before me. Hopefully, people will be able to learn something from me, and it just keeps going on. And that's how we all progress, obviously, in the academic environment. The next point would be some of the research methods must be feasible and appropriate to the question. So this all ties into your study design. And the last point, which is very important, studies should follow accepted scientific principles and methods. Now, this does not mean that you can't optimize certain protocols, but basically, if you are working with animals, let's just say you're doing animal studies, there is guidelines which you need to adhere to. There are certain controls that you need to adhere to allow your results to still remain valid. So these should actually be maintained. So we continue with this fair subject selection. We obviously want our results to give us an honest answer of the research question. So that means when we're selecting participants, it should be based on scientific objectives. So shall we say, if a pharmaceutical company is actually testing out a new drug that is targeted to women, right? Or the drug works specifically for a condition that women experience. So now, in order for the results to be valid, they can't go and say that, okay, you know what, we've seen the best results with this group A type of woman. So let's make all of our subjects be type A, and therefore we are producing incorrect results. It needs to be fair. It needs to be unbiased. It needs to be as representative as possible, because at that way we understand whether the results actually will work for everyone or just a minor population as well. The next point would be selection should not be targeted to vulnerable populations inappropriately. And we understand this involves children, especially children. You will need special permission to even do any work with them. Legal permission, obviously. And at the same time, if we look at certain groups, maybe people from certain backgrounds, maybe they have certain challenges, either mentally or physically, special consideration will have to be taken, and we are not allowed, obviously, any sort of ethical research should never ever target a vulnerable population to get a positive result. And the last point here would be the benefits to burdens kind of scale, where basically of research should be distributed fairly. So if we're doing a clinical trial with people, it should not just be only to the benefit of the company. There should be some perceived benefit to the individuals in the research or clinical trial as well. So I think we've discussed favorable risk to benefit ratio quickly. The next one is going to be independent review. So unaffiliated individuals should actually review research for participant protection. And this basically is a third party which allows that, you know what, this actually would be valid. The review should be competent, thorough, and free of conflicts of interest. Now, this is a key point here. Apologize once again for the noise. Conflicts of interest actually comes in quite strongly in terms of many different experiments that we're running or research that we're actually trying to perform. It needs to be free because we want unbiased opinions. And the last point to this will be because it reduces potential bias as well as self-serving interpretation of ethical requirements. Basically, what does this mean? If we look at many of the clinical trials, and I apologize for only using science examples, it's just something I'm more familiar with. If we look at a clinical trial, it's basically a study in which a drug or a product is going to be tested on people. So generally, these clinical trials are actually funded by pharmaceutical companies because the pharmaceutical company has actually developed the drug. They've poured in billions of dollars into developing this drug. They need an independent body to actually test the validity of their results as well. So they fund certain research groups to conduct these clinical trials. Now, obviously, in this case where there's exchange of money that's generally happening in terms of a payment for running this plan, if there is no third party that's going to be there, sort of like a watchdog, it would be very easy for certain groups to actually manipulate the results. So that is why independent review is actually a vital process in maintaining ethical research integrity or research integrity, shall we say. The next one I'll quickly go through, or the next two I'll quickly go through, is going to be informed consent. People need to be informed completely of all of the pros and cons if they are taking part in a research study. We can't just tell them, if you take this drug, there's a 50% chance of you getting cured. We need to tell them there's also a 50% chance of your condition actually getting worse. And that just allows everyone to be informed, and therefore they can make an informed decision. They need to have all of the facts present. And the last one is going to be, there always needs to be respect for participants. And this includes our privacy and confidentiality. Participants must be permitted to withdraw from any time, and this is particularly true for a clinical trial. New information about risks or benefits must be shared immediately or very quickly with the research group and the participants. And at all times, the welfare of the participants must take priority over anything else. We never want to put anyone at risk. So, still going to continue some of the core values. I'm not going to go too much in detail over the next two slides because I think it's things that we're all aware of. But just to make you aware of this, what are some of the core values of research integrity? The first one is going to be honesty. And this involves truthful reporting in all aspects of our research. We need to be transparent about our methods, what are the limitations of this experiment and some of our conflicts, and basically honest in every aspect of the research. So honest in the design, honest in what we're going to use, honest in what the projected results are, what the actual results are, what the positive results, what the negative results are. Because I think it's important for us to, well, most of us would know this, is that a result is a result at the end of the day. Even if it's not the result that you wanted, it's still something that you can discuss. It's still something that can be used to obviously maybe build on future work as well. So honesty is always important. Being accountable. So if we are performing a particular study, let's just say that there was some sort of error in analyzing our results and we reported these results. We need to be accountable for that mistake, and we also need to be accountable for anything that happens in the research space as well. We need to be able to acknowledge as well as correct errors when they are discovered. Then we've got issues surrounding professional courtesy and fairness. This is just, etiquette of being in a lab or being in a university. We need to be respectful of colleagues. If there's allocation of work, it needs to be done correctly. If two people are working on it, or three people are working on a project and all have contributed fairly, all of their names should go on the paper as long as they meet the criteria. There should be impartial peer review and evaluation of others' work, because once again, this is how we advance the field. And the last one is going to be a collaborative approach to resolving disputes. And the last point, as you have replicated professional courtesy and fairness. The last one's just going to be good stewardship. So careful management of your research data and resources, consideration of societal implications of research, as well as responsible mentoring of junior researchers. This area is actually a point that we'll discuss a bit, well, hopefully in a little bit, and preservation of public trust all through ethical conduct. So we coming towards the end of the presentation. So if there's anyone that has any questions or contributions, please feel free to pop it in the chat box, or alternatively, just feel free at any point to unmute your mic and you feel free to add in. So how do we go about preventing research misconduct? I've got 4 points here, and I think we can set up banners, we can let people watch videos, we can do all of these things here, but it all comes down to education and training. So where does this begin? Personally, I believe that in terms of ethical research practices, which eventually would lead to us, it will reduce research misconduct, should be implemented at the undergrad level. Because if we think about it, it should be implemented there. So when people come into university, they essentially, in their first year, we have the opportunity to set out the rules and what is commonly performed within a university. We have the ability to mold them and allow them to adopt these practices much easier on. So therefore, it becomes second nature. So in that regard here, we can run education and training, and even moving forward from undergrad to honors, master's, PhD, and even do refresher courses in terms of academic stuff as well. So these education and training approaches will basically focus on understanding ethical implications, as well as what standards are specific to your discipline. Also making people aware of relevant policies, regulations, and guidelines, as well as developing practical skills for ethical decision making. I think this one here would be interesting and probably would be able to be implemented within your research group itself. The last one would be awareness of what are some of the common ethical challenges and how have people successfully addressed them in the past, so that I don't make the same mistakes as well. So this is the point that I was talking about. As a way to reduce research misconduct, I think the role of the mentor is actually key here. So we understand that when someone comes into a research group, or into a group, especially at honors level, they are very impressionable and they look at the behaviors of those around them. And eventually we model the behaviors, or we take on some characteristics of members of our research group. So in this case here, if we model ethical behavior in our own research practices, what we're doing is that we create opportunities for ethical discussion as well as decision making. We also provide appropriate oversight without micromanaging, because we understand when someone comes into our research group, essentially the goal is for us to develop them to be independent researchers who can think critically. So obviously micromanagement actually works to the contrary of that. We also, by modeling ethical behavior, it allows us to set clear expectations for what responsible conduct is, as well as recognizing and addressing pressures that might compromise integrity and creating an environment for discussing mistakes and challenges. And I think this feeds back into one of the sessions we had about feedback, where how feedback was seen maybe 20, 30 years ago, where it's basically an instruction from your supervisor, is very different to how it's seen today. Feedback currently is more of a dialogue where basically you will explain to your student, this is where you're going wrong, and provide further details so they don't repeat the mistake in the future as well. And what does this do? By us modeling ethical behavior, it develops a culture of integrity. And so always, this is a thought that I have, and I generally say this here, is that I know that as an individual, my ability to impact and change the world is very limited, because I'm just one person in a world of a few billion people, right? But what we can do is actually make the changes within ourselves. And the more we interact with students, we understand that they will start to model these positive behaviors as well. And by doing this, we basically will continue to expand, and hopefully they will change, limit and further reduce this negative culture of research misconduct. So how do we go about, my apologies again for the noise. How do we go about creating a positive environment as well as making guidelines to guide research conduct? The first one is to establish written lab protocols for data management. So I say lab protocols because, my apologies, I was thinking of it from my own perspective. But what are protocols? So if you're joining this lab, what are the protocols you need to follow? Create some authorship guidelines, implement mentoring plans with explicit ethics components, develop peer mentoring networks within labs, within and across labs. So obviously students, we understand, learn best. Yes, they do learn a lot from their supervisor for guidance, but they actually learn the majority of their work from fellow students. So by doing this here, if we have a particular group of students who have very good ethical practices, create a network, allow them to link up with new students coming in, and those practices will actually be shared further. And the last one would be to schedule regular review of raw data by multiple team members. And this basically just limits the potential of anyone being put under pressure and actually replicating or falsifying data. So in terms of data management and transparency, I'm not going to go too much into detail. I'll try not to go too much into detail. But essentially, some of the key points is, sorry about this. I think they're still going to be working for a while. Okay, so when we start collecting our data, especially for a particular project, we need to develop a comprehensive plan before the research begins. Basically, we need to maintain detailed documentation, organize it, file it, come up with naming systems, whatever, so the data can actually be easily identified and located and does not get lost. It's important for us to also have secure backups of our research data. This can be on a cloud. I remember when I was writing up my thesis, I was a bit paranoid about losing my data. So I stored it on multiple USB drives. I stored it to the cloud as well as an external hard drive. So, may not have to go to that extreme, but it's always good for us to have a backup. Reason being is, let's just say in the unlikely case that a paper is actually accused of there being some sort of falsification of data, and what happens is that the day before your laptop crashed, you have no way to prove that your data is actually correct. So in that case, always good for us to have a backup. And this is something important that one of the professors actually mentioned, is that in academia, we should be keeping records of all assessments, activities, experiments, whatever it may be, for a minimum of 5 years or minimum of 5 years. That is because if any audit is being done, then we can actually pull out our library and people can go ahead with the audit. In terms of promoting transparency, so they say consider pre-registration studies, and this essentially means coming up with a proposal. University UJ does that, so that's fine. Share your data code and materials where possible. This one is, it was one of the points that we read up on. However, I think this is something you just have to be quite cautious about, because if you're sharing your data with someone without especially a supervisor's knowledge, it makes it very easy for a paper to be replicated as well. So just be cautious about how we're doing this. We need to report on all. We basically need to be transparent in every area of our project. If I can summarize it, it basically means be transparent. If you are doing a particular protocol, put down all of the details so that the experiment can be replicated. If you are performing certain analysis, also store your raw data, and maybe even if you're publishing, put the raw data in as your appendix, or maybe even put in a note there if someone requests the raw data that they can email you or something to that effect as well. Ethical authorship practices, I think we've discussed this previously. We need to ensure that all authors meet criteria for substantial contribution. We do not want to basically put people's names on papers who did not contribute to it. And we need to determine author order fairly and transparently, disclosing any potential conflicts of interest comprehensively. And in terms of peer review, the peer review process is actually absolutely integral to maintaining the integrity of academia. We understand that if there is some sort of compromise that happens there, we can't generally trust the papers which are being published, and therefore their results become invalid. So it is upon us to actually ensure that if we are involved in a peer review, that we are doing it correctly, that we are not doing it for any friends, and even if we are doing it for friends, that it is still following the same standards and procedures that you would do for under normal circumstances as well. We've mentioned this. And in terms of, I think I'm on the last two slides now, which would be building a culture of research integrity. And I wanted to end off with this because we understand what research misconduct, we understand the consequences, we understand some of the practical applications. How do we go about building a culture of research integrity? Firstly, we'll begin with ourselves. Personal practices. So we need to ensure that we have current knowledge of the ethical standards in our field. We need to be able to produce, basically store our documents meticulously, seek guidance when facing unethical or ethical uncertainties, acknowledge and promptly correcting your mistakes. It's never good for us to obviously leave something and just try and sweep it under the rug. And lots of the points that we've discussed previously would be, if we want to create a culture of research integrity, we need to model these behaviors, which would be fair, be honest, be transparent in everything that we do, disclose any conflicts of interest, allocate authorship correctly. So this will all build a culture of research integrity. In terms of developing ethical competence, some key points we've identified here would be regular reflection on ethical implications of research decisions, essentially meaning if we're performing an experiment, in your free time, as many of us would do, that experiment would unfortunately still be playing in your mind. So just reflect on it and try and look at it also not only from a perspective of, is this going to work, but also from ethically, does it align with ethical research practices? We continue to educate ourselves on research integrity, participate in ethics discussion or communities of practice, as well as create a personal guidelines for authorship and collaboration. So in terms of modeling integrity, what people see of us is not going to be necessarily our papers. It is going to be through our behavior, how we behave in the lab, in terms of how we handle our data, that kind of thing. So if we want to build a culture of research integrity, we need to model this integrity. And this means practically applying all of the skills and knowledge that we've, some of the stuff that we've discussed now into our day-to-day experiments and behavior in the lab, shall we say. So the last slide we'd like to talk about would be promoting open science practices. And essentially, open science means that we are as far as possible, we're making everyone aware of what we're doing, and we're being open and transparent in the type of research, in our results, in our analysis, whatever else it may be. And there's something new that I actually heard about, which is an open peer review process. I don't know if any members of the audience have come into contact with this previously, but I heard about it for the first time, like I think a couple of months ago. And essentially what this is that when you submit a journal, an article to a journal, automatically that draft will actually be published, or rather it will be displayed on their website. It'll get a DOI, and then after every set of revision with the reviewers' comments will actually appear in sequence on that web page. And people can actually go and track the change from, let's just say, your draft 1 to your draft 3 and how the comments have been addressed. And this is your open review process. So something new that I've just learned recently. And the last one would be, let's go through some benefits of research integrity. Number one, it's going to increase accountability as well as transparency. It's going to allow us to verify results and allow other research groups to actually replicate and build on our work, which ultimately will be of benefit to society. We're going to reduce selective reporting and publication bias. Basically, we come back to the point about falsification, where we are omitting certain results by basically enhancing research integrity. We would create incentives for basically using the right methods to get your answers. It also allows early detection of potential issues, promotes collaboration and efficient use of resources. And the last point we'll speak about is that it enhances public trust in research findings. And I think if I have to summarize this presentation or some of the key points of it, I would say research, or rather, ensuring that we act ethically and do not conform to research misconduct. Some of the key points would be, number one is that it's going to protect the research itself. It's going to protect you as a researcher, and it's going to protect basically people's view of how research is actually being conducted, allow them to trust more what's coming out of the research institutions as well as pharmaceutical companies. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I know that I spoke for 98% of the time. But if there's anything that you'd like to discuss, anything you agree or disagree with, or would like to go into further detail, please feel free to unmute your mic and ask your questions. Other than that, thank you. I'll hand back to Mr. Nkosi.
Thank you so much, Dr. David, for such a very insightful presentation. I don't know if the colleagues do have a question. If you do have a question, just unmute your mic and ask. However, you can also type in the chat or under the Q&A, and then I will attend to your question. In the meantime, Doc, you spoke about authorship and making sure that everyone participate or contribute. And then now, how do you approach when someone expects to be listed as a co-author without any meaningful contribution?
Well, that's a good question. Thank you, Nkosi. I think in this regard here, it's always good for you to pull up the guidelines. So instead of saying, I don't think you deserve to be an author, pull up the guidelines and be, in order for, according to this, and there's guidelines online, we can provide those resources. You show them the guidelines. In order for you to be considered author, you need to meet these criteria. You need to be involved in every step of the project, from conceptualization to analysis and writing, and you need to have made meaningful contributions. Because I do understand sometimes that, let's just say, Nkosi, that you're writing a paper, right? And what has happened is you need this one piece of analysis to be done on your data, but unfortunately you don't have the equipment or the program to do it. So what do? You reach out to a friend of yours and say, you know what, I'm really struggling with this. Can you please analyze this data? Give me the analyzed results, and I will thereafter write up on it. So in that case, the question arises, should the person who did the analysis actually get the title of being an author? From what we've been reading up and what we've been instructed, the answer would be no. They would be listed under the acknowledgements. But in order for you to be an author, you need to meet those criteria. So I think when you're addressing such questions, I think it's important at the beginning, as with any relationship, is that you lay out, you have a clear understanding of expectations. If you are going to be participating and just doing the analysis, unfortunately, you do not meet the criteria for being an author. But we will be sure to acknowledge you in the acknowledgement section of the paper, because you don't want to remember, especially if the person has not contributed significantly to the research, it's also going to affect the distribution of the units as well. So that is also something. And obviously, the more collaborators we have in a paper has other implications in terms of, funding and so on. So it's something which has to be considered very, very carefully. But yeah, I hope that answers your question, Nkosi.
Yes, you did, Doc. And also, now I'm understanding also, and that will help also with the authorship order in terms of now making an order of authorship. If you do
Yes.
have that meeting or those and outline those expectations at an early age, at an early
Yeah.
stage, I think you can now align and say so and so will contribute this much and much. I'm well answered, Doc. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Are there any more questions from any members of the audience? Anything at all? Please feel free to unmute your mic and speak, or you can type to the chat.
Yes, colleagues, if you do have a question, just unmute your mic and ask. Or if you do have any contribution towards the presentation, is there anything that you would like to add or any point you would like to elaborate? Please just unmute your mic and ask a question. Thank you. Okay, I see that we don't have any further question, Doc. Probably your highlights, Doc, just to summarize, probably. Oh, there is a question. Let me check. There is a question from Dr. Maria. How should the authorship be in cases whereby, as a supervisor, you have reworked the report and extract a paper from the student research?
I think that's a good question, and something that happens. I know it happens quite often, especially with your masters and honors and masters students, or maybe even where results are being combined. I think in that case there, from my experience, what has happened is that the supervisor has actually also put the names of the students who contributed to the results as well, because they obviously were involved in the design, in the conceptualization, the design, the actual performing for the experiments, collection of results, and the analysis. So they have met the criteria. If you are extracting a paper from it, then in order you can maybe even send it to them, for review or have a discussion, and they would meet the requirements to actually be an author on that. So if you as a supervisor are writing a paper based on the results from a student in your lab, I think according to the guidelines, to the best of my knowledge, it would be advisable, you would have to put the student's name on the paper, because they do meet the criteria in terms of being an author. You can put them as a secondary author, or you can share as both of you being primary authors. That would just have to be a discussion that you receive that happens between the student and the supervisor. So yeah, Dr. Maria, I hope that answers your question. If not, please feel free to elaborate, and I can try and share a bit more.
Well, thank you for that. Now, Doc, this question just pop up now. In case, as a colleague, I witness another colleague, maybe in the case of misconduct, academic misconduct, is it my platform to report that colleague, and to where or to whom do I report to? Or is it now a case of a supervisor to report that colleague or a fellow student?
Okay, I think in this regard here, we also have to take the human element into consideration, right? So let's just say let's put it into context. Let's say that there is a new student that's coming into the lab. They're from a different country, and let's just say they're honors level, and you see them doing something that's incorrect. Now, what is the first thing that you're going to do? Are you going to go immediately report them? Or is the first thing you do is have a conversation and just let them know, what you're doing is actually unethical and we don't work this way in this lab. But at the same time, it would be important for you to let your supervisor know. So I think you don't need to escalate immediately, but in that situation, it is your responsibility to firstly speak to the individual, where cases where you have that type of relationship, and also make your supervisor aware. Reason being is because at the end of the day, if anything unethical is happening within your supervisor's research group, it's actually going to reflect badly on the entire group. So you follow the chain of command, which would firstly be you speak to the individual and therefore you let your supervisor know, and your supervisor will be in the unique position to actually escalate this further if they feel it meets all of the criteria to be escalated. So I think we also need to understand, and I remember, well, we went through at the early stage of the presentation where there's research misconduct and questionable research practices. Research misconduct is where someone is intentionally falsifying results. So in that case, say if they're falsifying results, you should let your supervisor know. However, if it's some sort of practice where maybe they're adding on their friends as authors or whatever else it may be, in that case, they have a conversation and also let your supervisor know. But at the end of the day, moral of the story is look at it in a case by case basis, address the issue or make the person aware of what they're doing if it's not correct. And the last thing would be is to let your supervisor know. And your supervisor will be trained, and many supervisors here would be trained to actually understand what are the next steps. Do they escalate to the head of department? And does it go even over and above that? Because if someone is falsifying results, it obviously it has severe consequences. There will be disciplinary hearings, there will be, like steps that are taken to actually address that. So I hope that answers you, Nkosi, for your question. Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you, Doc, for that. Well answered as well. I don't know if the colleagues do have any further questions or any contribution to make. Well, it seems like everyone is good at the moment. Just a quick reminder, colleagues, we do have another workshop tomorrow. The registration information will be shared to your model communities as well as via email to those that are not yet registered. Remember, if you are not registered yet, please send us an email and indicate that you would like to be added to one of the model communities. We do have a supervisor and PDRF module communities, as well as the RCT management system. So we have a workshop tomorrow on authorship and publication ethics, and another workshop on AI reading and writing software. That workshop is on Friday. The one for tomorrow is authorship and publication ethics. So just in summary of today's workshop, thank you colleagues for attending once again, for making your time to attend this workshop, and also to our facilitator, Dr. Lorenzo David. Just the key takeaway of this workshop for today. Today's workshop provided an insightful and timely discussion on the importance of upholding ethical standards in research. Dr. Lorenzo David did mention or presented on the types of research misconduct, including the fabrication, falsification, plagiarism, and ethical authorship, and also the practical steps for preventing misconduct, such as clear supervision, transparent communication, proper data handling, and institutional reporting mechanism. And also, he mentioned the role of supervisors, mentors, and institution in cultivating a culture of research integrity. So those were the key takeaway of this workshop, colleagues. together we can make this thing happen, to always stay ethical, making sure that even if no one sees us, but just to have that dignity and that pride to own your own work, to say, this is my work, I've owned this, and I've worked hard for this. And it's a great feeling to know that you have worked hard and now it's paying back for you. So, with that being said, colleagues, thank you so much for attending once again. And to our facilitator, Dr. David, thank you for taking your time. We do hope and believe that we will see you in the next workshop, which is in tomorrow at 10. The communication will be sent via module and via email for registration for that workshop. A reminder, a quick reminder that I've shared a feedback evaluation on the chat. Colleagues, please take your 2 minutes and fill that feedback in. We kindly request you to fill that feedback. It helps us in terms of organizing workshops, as well as to now prepare for future workshops where we can improve our services and providing better workshops and services to UJ at large. Thank you, colleagues, once again. We can now end this workshop and have a great day further. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Thank you.